Hello. Today I'm just going to deliver a message from my heart to you. And the reason I'm bringing this message, and I think it's so important for me to deliver this message now, is that I really believe we are at a crossroads now. So I believe we're at a crossroads whereby we can unite and act together and help build a better future for humanity, or we can remain divided and we could fall individually into an abyss of economic misery. Now, personally, I was at this crossroads about 10 years ago where I was promised a very, very significant salary for staying within the banking system when I decided to depart and leave. But I did not. I had enough, basically, of the immorality of the system. I had enough of the antics, the shenanigans, the deceit, the fraud, and there are actually instances whereby I advise my clients not to do deals, even though that deals would have put an easy $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in my pocket in commissions. So I knew I was never going to advance in this corporate structure, in this machine that was so intent on destroying the wealth of people by basically just fulfilling the Matt Taibbi description of Goldman Sachs, the giant vampire squid. You know, just basically transferring everyone's wealth to itself and destroying lives everywhere. So I decided at that point that I was not going to sell my soul for riches, which I think everyone in the banking industry that has been at some type of executive level has had to make that decision, whether they want to sell their soul for riches or whether they want to keep their integrity and walk away from the business. Now, there's a reason why a lot of people don't understand the reality of how bankers and central banks and big commercial global banks are actually destroying humanity today. And that is because the bankers now control all the media. They also control a lot of the institutional academia. So they spread their propaganda through all those means so people do not understand. And this has been well known. So this is a fact. It is not speculation. For example, let me read you something that a U.S. congressman said in 1917. So again, we've known this for 100 years. Back then, he said J.P. Morgan concluded that it was only necessary to control about 25 of the newspapers in the United States to influence what everyone believed to be true in the U.S. So he quote-unquote said, an agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper, means furnished by J.P. Morgan, to properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers, who again, the purchasers were J.P. Morgan. So U.S. Congressman Oscar Callaway said this in 1917. So you don't have a kook that's saying this, although you could people probably think today that U.S. congressmen are total kooks. But back then, congressmen 100 years ago were more respectable and actually did fight for the people instead of fighting for the corporate interests that serve as their lords today. So the interesting aspect of this is that people are continually fooled. For example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics run by another banker, because the person running the Bureau of Labor Statistics that produces the unemployment stats in the United States right now is a former employee of the biggest private bank in the United States, the U.S. Federal Reserve, and they quote unemployment to be 6.3%. But if you disregard that completely, which you should, and you just go to stats, if you look at the fact that there are 267.7 million Americans of eligible working age today, and of those 267.7 million working age Americans, only 145.7 million are employed. So what does that leave you? 122 million without a job. So if you have 122 million without a job, how does that equate to only 6% unemployment. Any logical person could easily understand this, but the fact of the matter is, like the quote I gave you 100 years ago, the bankers have totally overrun the media. So now everyone just believes all the lies and propaganda that they shell out. Now, why my message today is so important is that there are ways that we can conquer these immoral schemes of these bankers, and there are peaceful ways, because as you know from my previous videos, I always will advocate peace before violence. Now, if the bankers become violent towards you, then by all means protect yourself by any means necessary against them. I'm not saying to lie down before the immorality of the bankers, but I'm saying that we need to be above them. We need to be better than them. And the way to do it, there is a way, and that we could basically inspire a peaceful revolution. Now, I tend to believe that there are still many good people that you can call the worker bees, the people not making the $5 million, $10 million, $20 million a year within the banks. These people are just the worker bees that don't benefit from the deceit, from the fraud, from the exploitation, from the extortion of these big global banks. But yet they continue to support the system. And I believe also, because when I walked away over 10 years ago from this corrupt, immoral banking system, I asked some of my colleagues, are you happy with what you're doing? And some of them told me they were flat out miserable. They say, I hate this job, John, but the fact of the matter is I've been doing this my whole life, so I don't know what else I would do. And they said the money is too good to walk away from. I don't want to be starting at the bottom of the barrel and go into another industry. So that's the reason I believe that a lot of people feel like the queen bees, like Jamie Dimon, Stuart Gulliver, Brian Moynihan, Lloyd Blankfein, Michael Corbett, they believe that these queen bees cannot be defeated. So they take on the mantra of if you can't beat them, join them, right? But I believe if they believe they could be beaten, then they would join us on the side of righteousness, on the side of freedom and liberty. So here's my plea to them, because there's two peaceful mechanisms we can use. One would be just to convert your fiat, just a percentage, because I know there's not enough big believers out there that would convert the majority of their fiat currencies into physical gold. But you should be doing this if you really understand things, because if you look at some of the other videos that we're going to be producing here in our Smart Knowledge U video channel, you'll see that the real returns of the U.S. stock market over the last 13 years is greater than negative 65%. And even though bonds are being sold as the next best thing right now, U.S. Treasury bonds since sliced bread, because of the yields that they're throwing off right now, if you take these yields, which are unsustainable, and project them over the next 10 years, if you look at true rates of inflation, you're going to end up with a negative 60%, greater than negative 60% loss in real wealth. Because nominal gains don't mean anything, because the nominal gains turn into real negative losses when you take into account real inflation. I'll prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt in upcoming videos, because just like I showed you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the unemployment is multiple times higher than the lies of 6% that the government is telling you. I'll show you that real inflation is multiple times higher, and then when you take into factor and account real inflation, you'll see that all the assets that all financial advisors are selling you today are assets that are guaranteed to lose you wealth, whereas the only assets in the world that have returned real wealth in the past decade is physical gold and physical silver. Despite the volatility, I will prove to you in upcoming videos that this is a fact. So I said there are two ways, right? We can basically cause this Ponzi fractional reserve banking scheme to collapse. One is just convert your fiat currency into gold. And it can just be a small percentage, because if enough people convert just a small percent of their fiat currencies into physical gold, because there's a limited quantity of physical gold, it will break the backs of this immoral fractional reserve Ponzi banking scheme, and it will basically free people to rise out of poverty. It will create real sustainable growth in GDP versus this inflated GDP that is being inflated on the back of hookers and cocaine, and I'll put articles below if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Like the UK is actually putting hookers into their GDP to raise the GDP. They're putting drug sales into GDP to raise the GDP. So if you want real sustainable positive growth in your GDP, then one way to do it is to convert just a little bit of your fiat currencies into physical gold. Now, I explain much more in detail in my book, The Golden Gift, available on lulu.com, Lulu.com, and Amazon.com. So if you want to read more about it, please just get the book, and I explain much more in length how that will help free people from the debt enslavement of the current banking and monetary system today. Now, secondly, the second thing we need to do is convince the worker bees to abandon the hive, because everyone knows if worker bees abandon the hive, the queen bee will die. So in order to get the queen bees to die, the worker bees must abandon the hive. Now, the worker bees hardly can claim that they're ignorant. In the beginning, they were saying, we didn't know our bank was laundering money for violent drug cartels that murder, 80,000 people. Or we don't know that our bank was rigging Forex rates. But now you can't say it, because the heads of Forex trading desks for 4 large global banks have resigned, meaning, it's just a euphemism that they were fired because the banks don't want the regulatory agencies to be able to interview them as bank employees and perhaps even fine them more or shut down their operations. So, if you're not fined, you're being sent off to faraway lands, because some of these bankers that are responsible for this fraud had then been sent to Dubai, so out of sight or out of reach of the regulators, unless the regulators buy a ticket and travel to Dubai, whereas other bankers are just being suicided. So, there was a slew of suicides at the beginning of this year, which I believe were actual murders. So, there's a whole combination of things going on right now. But if the worker bees realize what's going on there, that they're part of the system, I believe that they will choose positivity. Because if they walk away, if they refuse to no longer support the system, and again, I know that the executives at these banks send emails to a lot of these worker bees to tell them how to keep clients that may be disenchanted with the bank because of the news of this criminality of these banks. So I know the worker bees know, because I have seen dozens and dozens of these emails that come from the executives telling the worker bees how they should deflect criticism away from their criminal activities and what they need to tell their clients in order to keep them at the bank as a client. So the fact of the matter is that ignorance can no longer be claimed. The number one reason, again, I think that a lot of really good people stay within these banks is because they feel they have no choice. They don't know what else they would do and don't feel like they can make a living if they left the banks. So I believe that we need to convince everyone that has been making this choice that if they walk away and there's a collapse of the system, they can be part of something great instead of part of something evil. In other words, their skills will still be necessary to rebuild the system, the total system, the global banking system from the bottom up, and to ensure that it's built on principles of integrity, of sound economic principles, where basically we're building the monetary system on sound money of gold and silver, not fractional, gold banking, because that was basically essentially what Bretton Woods is, and that's what banking shields used to argue that we should not return to gold standard because Bretton Woods failed. No, it failed because it wasn't a true gold standard. It's fractional reserve gold banking, which is not what we need. I've also seen in recent articles that people have suggested how to overcome the fraud of gold price manipulation in the futures markets, because all the gold that is sold is basically imaginary gold. So when the bankers sold 12.8 million ounces of gold, or it might have been 12.6, I can't remember, either 12.6 or 12.8 million ounces of gold within just 30 minutes or an hour last April to slam the price of gold down from 1,700 all the way down to 1,300 or 1,200 eventually, that they started this by basically selling more than 12 million, close to 13 million ounces of imaginary gold. So some people, I saw, for example, James Turk, who I respect from Gold Money, saying that all these banks that short gold like this, so if they're going to sell 12.8 million, they should be required to hold 50% of that. So that would have been like 6.4 million ounces of gold. Will prevent these shenanigans from taking place. But I say, why 50%? They should be required to hold 100% of that physical gold if they are going to sell it short into the market. Why be able to sell 50% of imaginary gold? That's the problem. We don't need fractional reserve anything. We don't need fractional reserve futures. We don't need fractional reserve banking. So you can see this will be a big undertaking to rebuild the system. So I urge people to walk away, because if you have the courage to do this en masse, and walk away and save your souls, then you can be part of the positive process. You will leave a legacy to the world, because much of what happens today, much of the macro evil things that go on in this world today, like poverty, famine, it all has to do with the current immoral banking system. All wars of bankster racket. Go to my blog. Look at the current map I showed you of all the NATO-US war interventions or declared wars in the past decade. And look, they're all against countries that are not part of this New World Order, that are not part of the World Trade Organization. If you look at General Wesley Clark, go YouTube, 7 Wars in 5 Years, Wesley Clark, C-L-A-R-K, and you will see that the U.S. had planned wars against all countries that did not have a private central bank controlling the monetary supply of those nations. So you can see that war is always a bankster racket. So if you're part of this system, you're part of millions of human deaths, you're part of misery, you're part of spreading and supporting the system. So why be part of this system when you can be part of something great? You can be part of the restructuring of the entire system that promotes compassion, that promotes the ability of people to get out of poverty. Now, one of the worst people in the world, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was also, President Obama called him a great man and one of his closest advisors. Now, if you want to see what the crazies in charge of all governments today really believe, look what Brzezinski said. He said, to put it in terminology that harkens back to the more brutal age of ancient empires, the 3 grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy. So he's saying these are the 3 top imperatives of the United States are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals. So he's basically calling all other people in this world vassals, which is just another word for slaves, to keep tributaries pliant and protected. Now, tributaries are citizens that bow down to the power of government. So he's calling all citizenry pliant, which means subservient. Again, it's a term for slaves. To keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together. So he said anyone that's against them and these bankers and what they're trying to do, he calls them barbarians. So this is the ludicrousness of the people that, the worker bees in the banks, that they are supporting. They're supporting this total abyss of morality and lack of morality. So that's why I urge people to reconsider, because if they walk away, the highs will collapse and there will be a new system and their skills will be necessary. So all I'm asking people to go through a small period of uncertainty and perhaps, just take a small pay cut. So wouldn't you rather have a small pay cut, be much happier, do something that everyone is going to love you for doing, instead of walking around with a target on your back and have people hating you for being part of a system that is so immoral and that's once worse. Now, why I'm bringing this message to you today as well is because if you look at what is going on with these bubbles in real estate markets in Asia, with these bubbles in the US stock market, when things collapse, and they will collapse, when they collapse, we are going to be taken to war. You see that throughout history. Again, all you need to know is that history repeats itself. You had the financial panic of 1907. Then we got World War I. You had the U.S. stock market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression. We got World War II. So when this third collapse happens, we are going to get war. Now, this is just not speculation, because go again, read the articles I'm going to put below, because there's a site by the former Assistant U.S. Treasury Secretary Paul Craig Roberts where he said, "Are you ready for nuclear war?" And basically what he discusses is that this is a fact that the people running, the banker-run U.S. government right now, they have tabled as an option nuclear war. And they are planning a preemptive strike, a strategy. They are actually planning this now, preemptive strike in China and Russia, because they believe they can strike China and Russia with nuclear arms, disable their ability to strike the U.S. back. That's how crazy they are. And this, what is it for? It's to preserve U.S. dollar hegemony across the world, because these bankers have never worked an honest day in their lives, because they depend upon this immoral global banking system for them to transfer the wealth of all citizens to themselves, and they don't want to have to work an honest day in order to maintain and preserve their wealth. So that is why they are tabling nuclear war as an option. So what happens, why you always get war after financial collapses? Why did you get war after the financial panic of 1907? Why did you get World War II after the U.S. stock market crash in 1929? It's because these bankers, they suck the lifeblood out of all the citizenry, and they suck the wealth out of all the citizenry of their country. So when that wealth is all sucked dry, they need to go outside the country and suck the wealth from other citizens of other nations. That is why war is declared. So this is the point we're at. So that's why I urge people, okay, if you don't agree or believe with anything I'm saying, then at least you should consider the fact, am I part of a system that is spreading misery around this world? Even if you don't agree with it, you should research it enough. Just like if you're an accountant for Hitler and you say, and you look at the rise of the economy under Hitler, you say, no, this is great. Hitler's not a bad person, and I'm just an accountant, so why am I going to exit the system? I believe in everything that the Ministry of Propaganda in Germany is telling me, that I ain't going to stay in the system. But it is up to you, if you value your soul at all, to do the research and to find out. So very minimum, I urge you to go look at the links below and to determine if you are part of a system that is destroying humanity. And if you decide that what I've told you is actually factual, then I believe you need to not only just exit the system, that's not enough, but you need to convince all your colleagues to exit the system. Because if you collapse the system, like I said, you could be part of one of the greatest restructurings of any system in humanity. We could put in an honest banking system full of integrity that helps humanity, that helps people in poverty, that stops wars. Okay, so that is my plea to you today. And I believe it's a super important message because, again, I said we're at a crossroads now where if we don't get the good people in banking to exit, they're going to continue supporting a system that is going to destroy all of us. So as always, remain intensely curious, because if you remain intensely curious, you will get to the bottom of what's really going on, of all this propaganda. You will uncover the truth, and the truth will set you free. Thanks for watching. Take care. So long.